We have Cole Harrison today, who's the Executive Director of Mass Peace Action, which is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to develop the sustained political power to foster a more just and peaceful U.S. foreign policy. Mass Peace Action is an affiliate of Peace Action, which is the nation's largest grassroots and disarmament membership organization. Harrison joined Mass Peace Action 2010 and became the Executive Director 2013. Thank you for...
Oh, all those details are written down somewhere, huh? Nice.
So can you speak more about the work that you do at the organization and your role?
Yeah, so we're a peace advocacy group. Peace is one of the major social issues in our country. And yet the peace terrain, the activist terrain has changed over the years. There have been times, peace movement, like other social movements, kind of rises and falls with the perceived urgency of the problem. There have been times like during the Vietnam War and during Reagan's time when he was trying to build Star Wars, and when there were, or even to some extent during the Iraq War, when there were large-scale protests, there was large-scale civic debate and argument about questions of war and peace. But other times, even though sort of everyone's aware of it as an issue and everyone has an opinion about it, it can kind of recede into the background of all the other topics. So our job as an advocacy group is to kind of keep that ferment going and keep the, gather the activists at the time when the energy is high and keep them going and keep them focused when attention turns to something else. And we also try to do it in coalition with the broader progressive movement, because we do think that peace has to be achieved through a more broad progressive political transformation, not only in the United States but in the world. So in that sense, we see peace as sort of one plank of a larger agenda, and we try to take care of our peace, but also connect it to climate justice, racial justice, economic justice, and so forth and so on. Our three major issues are nuclear disarmament. That was our founding issue. That's still one of the biggest risks, along with climate change, that could destroy human civilization at almost any moment. And even though people have gotten used to the nuclear bombs and think, well, they haven't gone off in 70 years, maybe maybe it's not that big of a risk. In reality, it still is a big risk. In fact, it's an increasing risk once again. After a period of relaxing of tensions, after the end of the Cold War, now there seems to be a move towards great power confrontation again between China, Russia, US, and they're all building new nuclear weapons and rearming. Here in the US, we have a nuclear weapons modernization program in which we're building all new stuff, all new nuclear submarines, nuclear missiles, nuclear bombers, nuclear factories to produce the missiles, and so on. It's incredibly expensive, and it also looks really dangerous if you're another country. So they, in turn, are building their stuff as best they can. Russia's kind of scrambling to come up with the money to stay even. China is doing better, except during the coronavirus. It's kind of set them back for the moment. But in general, China's slowly building up its armed forces and its nuclear as well. So we're headed into a new great period of great power competition, a new period of nuclear arms race. And so one of our missions is just to wake people up to this and say, look, it seems like nothing's happening, but watch out, it really is. We have to worry about this. Second is we've been very concerned about US wars and interventions with the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, with threats of war against Korea and Venezuela. It seems like they're multiplying. Yemen. I think US armed forces are in over 140 foreign countries now, many of them secret, or what they call special forces. It's not really advertised, but it's still a military presence that's doing something. And a lot of times these interventions actually are counterproductive. They make us less safe because they destabilize the societies, they generate opposition, and they kind of polarize and inflame the politics. So you actually have more terrorism in the Middle East now than you did 20 years ago when we said we were going in to deal with terrorism. And that's because our methods to confront terrorism stimulate more terrorism or stimulate more controversy and opposition. So we favor a much smaller U.S. footprint overseas, And we think the mission of the United States military should be to defend our country and not really to police the world. We don't think the world asks for a policeman. It doesn't want a policeman. It's complicated to get 200 countries to work together and figure out how to build a peaceful world together, but that's really what is necessary. The United Nations was a step towards that, but the United States, even though it started the United Nations, has stepped back from the United Nations, has stepped back from international agreements, and is sort of trying to impede that whole so-called rules-based system that the United States, 80 years ago said it wanted, and now it's trying to throw a monkey wrench in as much as it can. It never quite bought into the concept that it too had to follow the rules, right? But it's even more so these days. So this is a big problem. And third is we're trying to cut the U.S. military budget. Just in terms of our own people, our own country, the needs of our society, we're spending $1 trillion a year on our military. It is very expensive to police the entire world, and to try to do that, to prepare for every possible contingency, to prepare to make war in space and in cyberspace in every different corner of the world. And so that's what our tax dollars are going to. And we're actually, if you look at the discretionary budget that Congress votes to appropriate the taxpayers' funds every year, more than half of that goes to the Pentagon, and then in turn to the private contractors who provide weapons to the Pentagon. And less than half goes to everything else. It goes to health, education, welfare, and so on and so on. So, you want housing, one of our strategies to connect the peace issue to the progressive issues is to point out to the many people in our country who are concerned about the need for housing, the need for better schools, the need for health care, and so on, that here's a big pot of money that's actually being used for something that isn't really helping us. It's kind of a runaway train. Let's divert this money back towards things that we need. So when we see in the political space that people want to, they want Medicare for all, or they want at least some kind of better health, more complete health care. They want a Green New Deal. They want a new energy system to fix climate change. Here's a big pot of money that can be used to help that. Plus, it's not just money. Here's some, all those companies like, okay, I'm going to digress slightly, but Raytheon is one of our poster children because it is it's the second largest arms manufacturer in the world. It's going through a merger with a company called United Technologies in Connecticut. But once it completes its merger, it will be the second largest arms producer in the world. Its headquarters are in Waltham, Mass., less than 10 miles from here. So if people in Massachusetts think that the arms race and everything is very far away, it's not. It's right here among us. And Northeastern University in particular is in bed with Raytheon, as you may know. There's an amphitheater here named after Raytheon. Many Northeastern students go to Raytheon for their what do you call that? It's not internship, co-op. Yeah. Apparently, like Raytheon, is one of the largest number of people that go on that. And indeed, they're a very high-tech company. They're building all kinds of super-duper, high-tech stuff. We need those smart engineers to be working on things like a new energy grid and new energy technologies. And that would be they probably would be happier doing that too than building weapons, right? There's a big opportunity there. Just to segue, we were here 2 weeks ago for a protest because Raytheon came to a jobs fair. I'll just pass this around so you can see some of the way we describe our stuff, and it happens to apply to Northeastern. So we came to that jobs fair. We had some students and some off-campus activists that came and stood for an hour or two. It was really cold that day in front of 360 Huntington to raise that issue. Anyway, I'm just rambling a little bit, but maybe I should stop and see if anybody wants to throw anything in. Otherwise, I could talk. The second part I was going to try to talk a little bit is sort of how we look at communications, since that's what you guys do.
Does anybody have questions?
You said the U.S. Armed Forces are in, did you say over 140 countries
Yeah,
now?
yeah.
I was just checking that.
Yeah. Oh, you're writing the article, so you got to get the facts, get the quote right. Okay.
What issues? Because I know that Peace Now is a larger national organization, but then there's also like state organizations.
Yeah.
And that's why you're
Yeah.
Mass Peace Now.
Yeah.
What kind of things are you working on within Massachusetts right now? Issues specifically?
Yeah, well, we're kind of a decentralized organization. You can't make peace activists follow a plan. I wish you could, but it's kind of like everyone has their own ideas, and we try to organize it and make it this campaign to frankly embarrass Raytheon is one of the things. And actually, we're not trying to drive Raytheon out of business, though in my heart of hearts I would like to do that. But in reality, what we're just calling on them is to stop selling weapons to Saudi Arabia during the time when Saudi is using those weapons to pulverize Yemen. I don't know if you've heard of Yemen. Yemen is not that big of a country. I think it's the poorest country in the Middle East. It's right next to Saudi Arabia. It's kind of below Saudi Arabia on the peninsula. And Saudi Arabia is trying to control it. And this has been going on for decades. But right now there's a war going on, which grew out of a civil war. But a new Crown Prince, MBS, or Mohammed bin Salman, got into power in Saudi Arabia. And the first thing he did is we're really going to go after Yemen. And there's a rebel group in Yemen called the Houthis that have a lot of influence there, and the Saudis are fighting them. And there's a huge amount of collateral damage, and the Saudis are not only bombing the Houthi troops, they're bombing the water purification plants, they're bombing the hospitals, they're bombing anything that sets up the civilian economy. According to the UN, it's the world's worst humanitarian crisis. So we don't think the U.S. should be contributing to that, and we think that a company like Raytheon should not be selling arms to Saudi. So anyway, that's one of our campaigns. We're kind of going around trying to educate the public about this behavior of Raytheon. They are amoral. They don't care who they sell the weapons to. They think that's somebody else's problem to solve, and they just make the weapons. Of course, and at the same time, though, they have to sanitize their image. So here we get into PR a little bit, is that they spend significant resources on trying to look like a good corporate citizen. They are one of the major funders of the Girl Scouts. They send engineers to teach girls how to become better programmers, getting girls into STEM. Okay, good, all for getting girls into STEM, but is that really so they can become programmers at Raytheon? They're one of the major corporate funders of the Walk for Hunger. Talk about ironies. It's the world's there's more than, I'm sorry, forgetting my numbers. I've heard of even 16 or 18 million people in Yemen, food insecure because of this war. So here's Raytheon trying to help the Walk for Hunger, and some of the Raytheon employees go and walk and they raise money, right? The Walk for Hunger is a commendable group. It raises money to feed the hungry in Massachusetts. We're all for it. And yet look at the contradiction where this company is basically using that to whitewash itself. So on. So we're trying to intervene in those events, and I think the Girl Scouts has an event next week at the Boston Marriott that we're going to, bring our signs and so on to. So I forgot if I drifted off of your question or not, but.
No.
Raytheon. Okay, that's really just one of the things we do. In terms of sort of street activism and public protest, that's one of the most active things we've been doing.
We had a question in the back.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier trying to deal with America's perceived role as world police.
Yeah.
And I was wondering how you try to go about that when the prevailing logic in that is that in World War II we had an unambiguous stance. We dealt with the great evil, and therefore we are so well positioned to be world police. How do we sort of divorce from that sentiment, which is getting just older and older and older, and address how the U.S. is actually functioning in the larger world as this sort of police force?
Yeah. Yeah, it's really hard. It's a combination of people pushing back in different parts of the world and people in the U.S. changing their view. It's true that this world police thing got started in World War II. We then moved on to a new enemy, communism. We then moved on to a new enemy, terrorism. So it's not like there aren't any problems with terrorism or something, but it's like what's the analogy? You're using a tool to solve a problem that it wasn't suited for. So there's this momentum behind the military approach that is kind of embedded in our society. In fact, we can go way back, right? We can go back to where the United States was founded with the conquest of America from the natives, from the slavery. So this sort of racist, exploitative mindset is built into America. So there's a lot of Americans that really are kind of caught up in that and saying, well, we're the greatest country, right? We're the super duper democracy. We know best. And so that American exceptionalism is really kind of hard to beat. It's an ideological challenge to bring about some new thinking. It's going to come about, I think, through real practical problems that people have to solve. I'll take, obviously, racial justice, a lot like Black Lives Matter, groups that are protesting America's racism are making the connections between the way we're applying racism overseas. It's no accident that we usually drop those bombs on black and brown people. Climate change, these people that are increasingly concerned that we have to do something urgently about climate change are seeing that if you have wars and disunity all over the world, you can't solve climate change. It has to be done as a world. Even the United States, if it got its act together, can't fix the problem alone. So ultimately, the climate change movement is going to have to take this on if it wants to win its issue, just like we have to work with them if we want to win our issue. So things are kind of going from bad to worse in the world in a lot of ways. So we hope that all the social movements that are work on this will raise some tough questions and begin to put it all together. I guess that's the best answer I can give you. I don't know if I really spoke to your framing, but yeah.
If you had the exact answer,
Yeah.
then these issues would be easier, but I don't expect.
But international cooperation, just leave it at that. That's Bernie Sanders. We work in the political arena. We endorse candidates. We have endorsed Bernie Sanders. Also, we've endorsed Ed Markey for re-election. So Bernie, one of his slogans that he increasingly repeats is, what if US, Russia, and China took that 1.8 trillion that they're collectively spending on weapons and instead of building weapons, use that on a common effort to combat climate change? So he's now putting that out in the political arena. He's the presidential front runner, I guess. So, is that going to begin to develop a political motion to actually relook at this? I hope so.
If Raytheon is number 2, what's the world's leading?
Lockheed Martin. Okay, so I was going to try to say something about how we look at communications. We're a small advocacy group compared to others. We have 2 full-time staff in Massachusetts. We have some part-time staff. We have a bunch of eager volunteers and committees. Many of our members are older. The Vietnam War was the time when the most number of people became peace activists and said, this is the most important thing. I'm one of those people. And kind of a lot of our activists are still running to learn the lessons of the Vietnam War, right? So during the subsequent periods of anti-war activism, there wasn't as great an ideological break. There weren't as many activists that stepped forward and said, peace is my bottom line issue. It's more now, like among your generation, it's more combined with the whole social justice mindset. It's part of it, it's in there, but it doesn't always rise to the top as a separate issue. But anyway, so it's just to say that a lot of our older activists, their communication skills are like in the age of print, kind of. So like if it comes to social media or even email, it's more on our few staff to get that done. But we're trying to, we send out e-alerts. We're constantly trying to build our list. We have a list of 9,000 subscribers of people that have, chosen to receive our emails. We send them out action alerts saying this is the vote in Congress, this is the speaker that's coming, this is the protest, come and do something. We put out print newsletters. We have a retired journalist, Jackie King, who is our newsletter editor, and she puts out 3 issues a year. And she is now, I should have brought copies today, I forgot. And she also has started to put out an e-newsletter, which we basically post the articles on the website, and then we send out a summary that links to 4, 5, or 6 articles. We post a lot on social media, trying to post interesting articles or comment on what people are saying. We are not as good on press as we ought to be. We're trying to get better. It's hard for us to get press coverage. It's kind of a vicious circle. If the issue isn't in the center of the public conversation, then the press doesn't really respond. When we went to this protest at Northeastern 2 weeks ago, we got an article in the Huntington News that did a good job of explaining what we were talking about and whatever. And so that's, in a sense, we're trying to make our own news and do our own communications. We also want to get better at using the mainstream media, getting op-eds in, but we're kind of clueless on how to do it right, I guess. So that's a quick summary of Mass Peace Action's communication activities. We could use your help. Anybody who wants to intern, we would love to have a young communications thinker to straighten us out.
That would, I would pass that along to our co-op advisors.
Yeah.
So actually, would they be contacting you?
Yeah.
Always looking for a new place for people to co-op.
So can you speak more on how these issues play out in the presidential election currently?
We started a whole on the presidential election. We're trying a 2-track strategy. It's kind of crazy to do two things at once. But one is to endorse Bernie Sanders. Through a discussion process, we decided that he had the best platform on our issues. So we endorsed him, and we've been trying to just get people to help him. Right? We set up phone banks in the office. We're almost like to work with the campaign to win the Massachusetts primary, just like any group that has a political position would do. The second is we started a nonprofit project. We were able to raise some money, tax-exempt donation, that wants to raise the issue of the military budget to all the candidates, or all the major candidates, let's say. And we called it the Elephant in the Room Project. And we made banners and signs, and we go to candidate events and say, why don't you talk about the elephant in the room, the military budget? And we have like a banner that has like 738 billion with all the zeros written out. I should have brought that stuff. We have been waiting for the last 4 months because we knew the Massachusetts primary was going to happen on Tuesday, and we knew that if the presidential candidates would come to contest the Massachusetts vote, it would be this weekend. And so far, we have 2 rallies by Bernie Sanders on tomorrow night in Springfield and Saturday morning on the Boston Common. And we decided we only have the capacity to cover 1. So we're going to the Boston Common Saturday morning with all our banners and signs. Because even Bernie, even though we support him, with our other hand, we could say you could still be better. You could still talk about this more. Your positions are good, but how high of an emphasis do you give it? So we want him to talk about it more. So we're going to go there with our banners and signs on Saturday and try to get some attention, both from him and the campaign and the public.
Does anybody have any other questions?
I'll bring up another political race, Markey versus Kennedy. I don't know if you're aware, but Ed Markey is the incumbent senator. He's only been senator for like 8 years or something. He was a rep, though, for 30 years, a long time before that. So he's kind of an older politician. And yet, he's pretty good on our issues. And so we endorsed him. And Joe Kennedy, a younger congressman from Newton, is challenging him. It's like the Kennedy name. He's part of the family and everything. He's raised money all over the country. But he's actually not very progressive. He's more of a moderate, more of a centrist in Democratic Party terms. Kind of a little, let's say a moderate / progressive. He's not awful, but so we've endorsed Markey, and we've been trying to kind of do the same thing and build up support for him. There was a debate between the two of them at WGBH last Tuesday. I think it was the previous week, if I'm losing track of time. But and so we were outside with signs, and we were in the audience trying to bring up our issue. and he actually cited us among several other groups. He called out the Sunrise Movement and and Mass Peace Action as several groups that endorsed his campaign. So that's a way of using, from our point of view, it's a way of using him to express our issue and to get some attention for us, and also hopefully to support someone that we hope will win.
So what would you say are the biggest challenges in your role?
I'll mention two. One is recruiting young activists. We're used to a certain way of organizing, and the peace activists from the Vietnam days are like very dedicated. They come out week after week, month after month, year after year. They haven't changed. But somehow that approach is not resonating with young activists as well. There's a few people in your generation who say, yeah, peace is my issue. This is what I care about. But not too many. At least we haven't met them. So we're trying to figure out how to set it up so that it resonates, because we know that there's incredible concern for peace among your generation. And yet we somehow aren't organizing it right, or we're not, in my opinion anyway, haven't quite figured out the way to conduct it so that it brings in a lot of energy. So that's one big challenge. We've tried organizing college chapters. We've tried organizing a separate youth group in downtown Boston, and so I think one thing we are finding on that is that actually the street activism seems to be more appealing to young people than sort of sitting around in meetings and discussing philosophy, which we tend to drift into. So if we kind of go out and have something where we walk around and do something outdoors, that seems to energize people. So we're trying to do more of that, particularly with Raytheon campaigning. That's one. And two is kind of leadership development. Our group is growing. I've been with it for 10 years. It's definitely got a higher profile than it did 10 years ago. But we haven't got enough leaders that can actually run with it and make something happen. So I'm kind of going nuts, running from one thing to another and trying to get these, because it's a volunteer, like any advocacy or social change group, it's all about the volunteers. It's not about the staff, right? Staff can't do enough, You're trying to get ordinary people to speak and do something, but how do you get them together to actually do it? That's kind of a challenge. I'm a beginner at that in a way. I feel like there's certain people who get it and others who don't, and they just know how to go out and do something. And obviously that can't be the answer, but that's sort of figuring out how to take activists and turn them into leaders is something I'm struggling with, something we're struggling with. We have working groups, we've set up issue-oriented working groups to try to mobilize volunteers and galvanize them. We have a group on Middle East wars. We have a separate group on Palestine, Israel. We have a group on nuclear disarmament. We have a group on climate and peace. We have a separate group on the Raytheon campaign alone, and so on. We even have a small Korea group, although it doesn't have enough members, but it exists. So each of those, the hope is that volunteer leaders will step forward and actually figure out what to do, figure out a plan of action and kind of carry it forward. But in several of them, it's kind of a struggle to get the volunteers to stay focused or to follow through. So that's one of my challenges, I guess, as to how to support that. I mentioned we have this newsletter editor that's a little bit new. She's been doing this for about a year, so I'm really happy. Tomorrow we're having a communications committee meeting where some of our volunteers are going to come together and talk about how our communications stuff fits together. So getting a bunch of volunteers to actually do communications in an orderly way, that's what we're trying to do.
And can you speak on how you think social media has impacted the work that Peace Action does? The biggest thing is it reaches new people. Social media is unbounded in the audience it can reach. So it always seems like there's new people that are responding to our Twitter or our Facebook. And
whatever it is we're putting out, it brings a steady trickle of interest in, and hopefully people that start to come in. Think of it as a ladder of engagement where you reach people through something like social media or an email, and then you get them on a list, and then you get them to a meeting, and then you get them to, kind of more of a leadership level, and then, so you're trying to move them along that continuum. So on social media, the risk is that the person kind of stays out there. They're interested, but they don't. How do you get them to the next level? That's sort of the challenge. I know we're reaching people. I think, I've tried to plot how many followers we have. One of my struggles with social media is like we built up our followers over 10 years from 100 to 4,000, which is good. But on the other hand, it's sort of like slow and it's not very flexible. And if you want to start something new, are you really going to spend 10 years building it up so that someone will listen to it? So I don't know how to get a new audience more quickly than that. So that's, we're doing something, but it's not probably with the greatest insight. But you should look at our social media feed and give us criticism. I kind of know what the problem is in a way. I just can't face it and I can't deal with it, which is that it's like easy for me to post an article, like somebody, there's a lot of critics out there, there's a lot of journalists, people like this gal over here who not only writes a news story but also writes an opinion piece, like this is what I think is wrong with what we're doing in Afghanistan, or this is what I think about this and that. There's a ton of those people. I love them. So when one of them writes an article, we post it. But we're really just kind of forwarding something. We're not really generating conversation with our group and with our plan. It conditions the opinion out there, but it doesn't move them towards action. So we need something more assertive that maps out the challenge and actually makes the case and tries to draw them in. And I sort of don't know how to do that, or just don't have time to focus on it.
Does anybody else have any questions?
I'd like to hear some statements, not just questions. I want your advice. That's why I came here. So I want each person to give me 2 or 5 minutes of how we should do better.
Do better at what?
Do better at communicating the message of peace.
This is the social media generation. You should be able to get all sorts of advice from people here. What platforms are you guys on?
We mainly do Facebook and Twitter. We do YouTube, just like mostly talking heads. Like if somebody gives an educational, some professor gives a talk, we take a video of them, we post it. It's not too compelling, but it's more like a reference. We do Instagram a little bit, but not very consistently.
I was actually just trying to post, I was getting blocked by Instagram because they branded content or something. I'm like, I don't know what the hell they're talking about, so I gotta figure it out. But so you're not gonna see yourself on Instagram today, apparently.
Ouch.
One of these guys. So what do you hope to do through social media? You want to get more actively engaged?
Bring the message to new people, not just the message that there's something wrong, but also that there's a way to do something about it. I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. Move people from concern to taking action.
When you're presenting your actions or your position on certain things, how often are volunteers able to see themselves as part of that presentation, part of that outreach? When someone goes to your Twitter feed and you're talking about, nuclear disarmament, do they see their peers who are marching or, writing letters or things like that, or are they seeing the journalists or the pundits' opinions?
Yeah, there probably is too much of that. I mean, if we hold a street protest, we'll take a picture of the people holding the signs, and so they'll see some people doing something. But if it's not holding signs, if it's just people sitting around a table writing letters together, how do we make that into a good picture?
What I think often helps is when people who are giving up their time to you to see their efforts being reflected in your messaging or your presentation of who you are. And that's a good way to keep people engaged, to see that, you know, their thoughts aren't just disappearing into the amorphous sort of void of
Yeah, does that make sense?
I would also say, do you go to, like, when Black Lives Matter has an action, or when, you know, other organizations have actions, do you go there? Because that would be a good way to get people who are already involved in other issues, and who are already, you know, working activists to kind of see you and want to join.
We do, but we probably could do that a lot more. We tend to generate so many ideas of things to do ourselves, so we end up involving a small number of people in a large number of actions, and then we don't take time to go to what the other people are doing. So that's a shortcoming, but thanks for the thought.
I feel like more personalized social media posts might help in like a way, like the something I've seen a lot on like activists accounts is like a focus on one specific activist, one specific protester, and really like kind of spotlight on them.
Interview,
Because-
sort of,
Yeah,
yeah.
and then it will kind of spread around their friend groups, and then that will bring in a lot more because people are just special and they love to be featured. It's just like the way.
Makes a lot of sense, yeah. Activist of the month or something, yeah.
Something like that.
I like it.
So, as you say that you do YouTube as well, what does that look like for you? What's your YouTube presence like?
It's, well, it's like I was saying, it's mainly talking heads at forums and conferences. So it's kind of a half hour of some professor type talking about something deep, you know, and that's great if you want to know, if you want to go deep into that topic, but it may not be super engaging to a new audience, you know. The problem is it takes thought to actually figure out how to make a 3-minute compelling video that draws people in.
Yeah, just off the top, like mini docuseries on various points in the process of taking action about something, like, you know, between the people who are involved, showing the way it's being built up, and with the actual action itself. It's just a good way of showing people who might be interested how they can potentially be part of this at any point in that process.
So for this Elephant in the Room project that I mentioned, we put on a conference a month or so ago. I think it was, you know, two plus hours of professors, and then we put all that up, and now we have we did get a younger activist who's condensed it down to, I think she said 25 minutes of highlights. But I should get, which I haven't even seen yet, but I should get her to take another step and also show the street protest and the planning meeting and something that makes it more like a complete circle, like you're saying.
Anything else?
To be completely honest, I'm pretty jaded by social media because it was my career for 5 years of my life. I was a social media copywriter.
Okay,
I worked
okay.
with ad agencies, and I've seen, for the most part, unless you're like a Nike or a Sony or someone who has the kind of money it
Yeah.
takes to build that presence,
Yeah.
it's not the easiest thing to do.
Yeah.
So when you did say it, I'm like, yes, I've been there, like with brands who are like, why isn't my page growing? And it's like, well, if you want to give us more money, maybe we can make it a bigger page.
Yeah.
Or like spend more money on content. And,
Right.
And I think the sort of the edge that you do have though is that your content is something that not everyone gets to be a part of. So it's a unique look. And I think Roberto said as well, like completing that circle of what happens behind the scenes, getting people more engaged in the fact that like it's not like you can be part of this and you can help us build this, and then like this is something that everyone needs to like fight for. I think those are the kind of things that might help engage people.
Interesting.
But
Yeah.
I'm still fairly bitter about it. I'm cynical. So
I think I'm still caught up in presenting kind of the brand image, you know, like as polished as we can, you know, presentation, but you're telling me that's really not the way. Yeah.
I mean, it is part
It's
of
been
the
over-
goal,
it's been-
but
it's
the other
been-
side is how the big companies sort of try to monetize everything.
Right.
So it doesn't help.
Yeah, and I guess we have a new thing now in the presidential race where Bloomberg has put on more ads than any campaign in history, and I haven't even watched them because I don't even watch TV, but apparently it's having an impact. It's moving the polls. So,
Okay, he's just running for Senate.
you sure?
That's what he said.
Anything else? All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. It's great to meet you all.